The key thing to keep in mind for shipping, let me throw it into three general categories. Number one, 80% of the stuff that enables people to grow food is transported internationally, whether it's equipment or fertilizer or fuel. Only 20% of food is traded internationally, but 80% you need the inputs to grow it in the first place. Number two, roughly half of all oil is shipped on the ocean blue, typically by supertanker, along with everything that comes out of the Persian Gulf. And then number three, safety on the waves is what allows us to have the East Asian manufacturing model, which is a fancy way of saying the manufacturing model. Because roughly half of all manufactured goods are produced in East Asia, and you will get components coming from Thailand versus Indonesia versus China versus Korea versus Japan. But the key thing to remember is less than 1% of that shipping happens on land. Japan is an island. Most of the Southeast Asian countries are either islands or peninsulas, and they're ringed by mountains. So physical connections independent of maritime trade in Asia almost...
In this video, Peter Zeihan provides a comprehensive analysis of the various geopolitical, economic, and trade challenges and transformations in the global system. Zeihan's arguments are focused on the maritime trade, oil markets, geopolitical dynamics, as well as China and the United States' distinct positions in the changing world order. He begins by breaking down the maritime trade into three essential components: agricultural inputs, oil, and manufacturing. He states that 80% of the inputs for agricultural production are transported internationally, whereas only 20% of the food is traded internationally. Half of the world's oil is transported via sea, predominantly by supertankers. Lastly, East Asia, which he describes as virtually the entire global manufacturing industry, is reliant on maritime safety, as about half of all manufactured goods are produced there. Recent geopolitical events, according to Zeihan, are accelerating the transformation of the global order.
Europeans, they're planned for an oil export ban, and a lot of the details are being made up as they go on. It's a very European policy in that regard. But what it is encouraging is a split in the way we view oil from the Russian space versus the rest of the world, and the different types of crude coming out of the Russian space. So the stuff that Europeans are primarily concerned about is Urals crude that is exported west to the European space. And that can only be sold for $60 or less now. And that's affecting insurance and shipping rates and the type of vessels that go in. And we saw over the course of the last 2 years how disruptions in simply the type of vessel being available can generate supply chain snarls. So now we're doing this with energy. But there's also a crude grade that exports to the Pacific that doesn't touch the European space at all, that trades differently. We now, just in the Russian space, have two fundamentally different markets, not just for pricing, but for physical accessibility, for the ability to get ships and insurance to allow it to move. One of the reasons why the world has been so stable since 1945 is there's been one oil price. Now, it's modified by the length of the journey or the quality of the crude, but there's one oil price and everything is safe. The Europeans have now created a system where a lot of countries in Europe are now going to have a vested interest in interfering with Russian exports west. That's one pricing margin. That's one security paradigm. That's one insurance policy system.
Notably, the decision by European countries to implement an oil export ban has split the oil market, creating different pricing, insurance, and security paradigms for different types of crude oil. This split, he believes, will lead to increased conflicts and complexities given that countries will no longer uniformly insure oil flows globally. Zeihan further elaborates on the historical context of maritime trade, explaining that it used to be a high-value enterprise until the post-World War II era, when shipping costs drastically reduced. However, he foresees a return to an environment where maritime trade's inherent value could lead to an increase in piracy and interference with shipping.
But then in the East, where the Europeans are not the players, it's a different crude grade at a different price point using different insurance systems by different countries. We have split the oil market now into at least three pieces, two Russian, one everything else, which means now countries no longer have a vested interest in making sure the oil flows everywhere all the time because we're not all in this together anymore. In the world before World War II, piracy, state piracy, and privateering were pretty common. Because almost everything that was shipped had an obvious value. The cost of shipping before the Cold War and globalization was about an order of magnitude more than it was previous. And in the pre-industrial world, it was an order of magnitude more than that. And the pre-deepwater era was an order of magnitude more. So interfering with shipping has always been very popular because you know that the value of the product is going to be high. It's only in the post World War II era that the cost of shipping has dropped so much that we put everything on the waves. So that's manufacturing, that's low value added commodities, things that normally you would produce and consume locally. It used to be it was all pretty much luxury goods or something of very high value.
Zeihan's analysis of the Biden administration's trade policy reveals a continuity of the Trump era, despite changes in rhetoric and presentation. He argues that Biden's approach to trade has a populist tilt that parallels Trump's, leading him to claim that it is as if we are experiencing a second Trump administration. One of the major issues Zeihan highlights is the United States Navy's inadequate capacity to patrol the global oceans effectively due to a reduction in its smaller vessels and a concentration of naval power in supercarrier battle groups. Nevertheless, he suggests that this is less of a concern for the United States, given its low dependence on maritime trade compared to other nations, such as China and Europe. China, Zeihan argues, is more vulnerable to a breakdown in global trade due to its heavy dependence on resource access and market access in distant countries.
The Biden administration is the most populist administration we have ever had, more so than Trump. Basically, it feels like on trade policy, the Biden administration is going through Trump's tweets and picking them out one at a time and expanding them into position papers and putting them into policy and running a really good grammar scrubber over it. And we're basically getting the second Trump administration right now from a trade point of view. And then second, even if we wanted to intervene, this isn't the 60s or 70s. It used to be that there were no other naval powers. And so the United States with the destroyer-heavy Navy after World War II could patrol the global oceans because there wasn't a lot of competition and we had the right tools for the job. But since 1990, we've retooled our Navy, we've retired most of our smaller vessels, and we've concentrated naval power into our supercarrier battle groups. And if you want to knock off a country, that is the tool. But if you want to patrol the global oceans in an environment where other people have ships, you don't need the dozen supercarrier battle groups we have. You need like 800 destroyers. We only have 70. So even if we wanted to be the global policeman and patrol the waves, we no longer have the physical capacity to do it. Now, that sounds bad, and it is, but keep this in mind. The United States is the least maritime trade-dependent country in the world. Only 12% of our GDP is from trade. About half of that is NAFTA. We're not the ones who suffer if global trade breaks down. China is at the top of that list. Europe is a close second. China utterly lacks the naval capacity to project power more than about 1,000 miles from its coast, and it is completely dependent upon resource access and market access in countries that are half a world away.
Furthermore, China's geography and current naval capacity limit its ability to project power far from its coastlines. The United States, on the other hand, is portrayed as having strong economic and defensive potential due to its extensive arable land, efficient waterway network, abundant port potential, and beneficial geographic position. These advantages, according to Zeihan, insulate the United States from some of the potential negative impacts of global trade disruptions. Zeihan's assessment of China's geopolitical and economic situation is rather critical. He points out that China's geography is challenging, with significant portions of the land uninhabitable and inhabited North China Plain susceptible to flooding and droughts.
Now, the Chinese currently have 3 aircraft carriers floating. The first one used to be a casino that they converted. They will never claim that it is combat capable. They just bought it from Ukraine to refurbish it so they could learn how it works. Their second one is a clone of the one that used to be the casino. The one that used to be the casino used to be a Russian carrier. They called it the Kuzanov, by the way, and the Soviets thought it was a disaster. During Soviet times, with Soviet resources, it just kind of caught on fire from time to time. The Chinese do not claim that these two will ever be combat capable. They're training for their engineers more than anything else. And they do have a third one that they're going through sea trials right now. And it is a larger carrier that they actually designed themselves. But again, it's a prototype. They don't view it as anything other than a test bed. So they might get their first carrier in 2027. Well, let's do the comparison here. So you've got the greater Midwest, which is the world's largest single chunk of arable land in the world, high agricultural productivity. It's directly overlain by the greater Mississippi system, which is the largest natural transport network in the world. And if you compare a modern superhighway system like the American interstate system to moving things by water, the cost of operation is about 1/12 to do it by water versus land. So we've got the best waterway network on the best bulk production zone. We've got more port potential on just the east coast of the United States than the rest of the world combined. The internal waterway network is bigger than all of the internal waterway networks of the rest of the world combined. Canada's on the other side of a bunch of deep lakes and forests. Mexico's on the other side of some mountains and some deserts. And we've got ocean moats. So great economic potential, great defensive potential.
He also emphasizes China's struggles to maintain internal cohesion and external power projection due to these geographical constraints. The emergence of China as a global economic power, according to Zeihan, is largely attributable to the geopolitical environment crafted by the United States. The United States' post-World War II efforts to unify the world under globalization and restrain countries that preyed on China, combined with the Nixon-Mao summit that brought China into the globalized system, enabled China's development. In conclusion, Zeihan's presentation offers an in-depth exploration of the intricate geopolitical, economic, and trade dynamics shaping the world today. His perspective underscores the significance of maritime trade and oil markets, the implications of geopolitical shifts, and the unique positions of China and the US in this evolving landscape.
China technically is a larger country than the United States, but about 2/3 of its land is either too hot or too dry or too cold to be inhabitable. So 95% of the population lives on 1/3 of the land. Of that 95%, 70% lives in the North China Plain, which is an area that's not much bigger than the United States east of the Mississippi, maybe about 2/3 the size of that. So you're talking 1 billion people in one footprint. That footprint is flood-prone, drought-prone, and the river is actually, after 3,000 years of habitation, the river bed is above the surrounding land area, so it just flows down a dike. So if they get a heavy rain, the dike overflows and the river goes down into where people live. Yeah, so when you hear about flooding in northern China, just run. There's no fix here. The land is relatively low productivity. In the south, you've got tropics and you've got mountains, so it's difficult to have integration. Hong Kong has always been a separatist area, even before it was called Hong Kong. And then you've got mountains and jungles separating it from Southeast Asia and India, but then you've got the great wide open of the Eurasian steppe connecting it to the Russian space. And off the coast, you don't have an ocean of moat. You've got all these secondary powers, Taiwan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan. And so China has never been able to penetrate out, but because they have a hard time unifying at home, others have often penetrated in. It's not the worst geography in the world. That's probably Afghanistan, but it's definitely in the bottom 10%. And it's only because the Americans unified the world into globalization that China exists as it does today, because we basically told all the countries that were preying on China to go home. We nuked Japan to underline that point. And so for the first time in Chinese history, the Han Chinese have been able to develop the way that they wanted to. And then Nixon and Mao had their summit and brought China into the globalized system to bring it away from the Russians. So I don't want to suggest that the Chinese played no role in their own success, but without the change in the strategic environment of Eisenhower and then ultimately Nixon, none of this would have ever happened.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into Peter Zeihan's take on the current state of global shipping, the split of the oil market, the challenges of global policing, and the complexities of China's position in the international economy. His analysis brings to the forefront the potential shifts in global power and the effects these may have on different countries and industries. As we have seen, these shifts might be happening sooner than we think. As always, these discussions are meant to stimulate your thinking, challenge your assumptions, and inspire conversations about where we are headed as a global community. As we all know, the world can change in a heartbeat, so keeping up to date and informed is more crucial than ever. If you found this analysis helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We are here to bring you the most critical discussions, analysis, and opinions shaping our world today. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Next time, we will continue to dig deeper into these geopolitical issues and how they might influence your life, your business, and your future. Feel free to comment below with your thoughts on today's discussion. We'd love to hear your perspective and engage in a lively dialogue with all of you.